Hey class, what am I doing now? Well, I'm on the lift. It's called a boom lift. It goes to 125 feet, I think. And the reason I'm up here is me and my crew really, is restoring a painting in this building in Lafayette, Louisiana. Had a lot of leaks in it, so we're up here fixing it so it doesn't leak. But one of the main reasons I wanted to film a video up here as an introductory to Proverbs is because you'll notice I have my safety harness on, got my lanyard on here, safe in the bucket, got my hard hat on. I am what you call safe. Now that doesn't mean the wind won't blow up here, because it will, and it can get scary, but I know I'm not going to fall. I'm trusting my machine to take care of me. It's an old machine, but it's never fallen yet to my knowledge, and you run this thing up all the way, and I'm not going there. I'm afraid of no man, but I am very afraid of a 6-foot ladder, so I'm going to stop here. But I wanted to show you the safety aspects of this machine, because we're about to go into Proverbs. Proverbs in itself is a safety machine. If you obey the things that the Lord teaches in Proverbs, you'll learn that you'll have a good foundation, just like a good foundation on this machine. It does not mean it's not going to be windy. It does not mean that you look down below and you can see the bottom and it's pretty scary. You're afraid you're going to fall. When you follow the rules of God, life is so much safer, so much easier to go through, because you've done the things that the Scripture says. And so I'm not going to spend much time on this thing here, but I am going to spend a lot of time in Proverbs. So let's get with it. Let's talk about what Proverbs has to us in order to keep us safe. Just imagine for a moment that your granddaughter, grandson, son or daughter came to you and asked you a question about life. How do I make friends, Grandpa? How do I know when things are bad or good? How can I tell when people are good or bad? Who am I going to marry, Grandpa? And how do I figure out who I should marry? What mistakes have you made, Grandpa? And what can you tell me as to how to avoid those mistakes? How do I make friends, Grandpa? How did you make friends? How do I know whether the friends are good for me or maybe not so good? How do I know what kind of vocation? How should I choose that? Why do we go to church, Grandpa? And why do we talk about Jesus all the time? Tell me, Grandpa, about the rules of life, and tell me about your mistakes so I don't make those same mistakes. Just imagine that those same questions were asked by your granddaughter, your child, your grandson. Wouldn't that be great if they came to you and they said, tell me about life. How do I enjoy life like you do? And how did you get so happy? You always seem to be at peace even when things aren't going well. Well, just imagine also that the rules of life from the Scripture are all down in one concise little book. All the rules listed, easy to understand, easy to read, kind of a montage of the vast amount of rules and suggestions for life throughout the entirety of the Scripture. That's what Proverbs is. And we begin today our study of Proverbs. Now, the study of Proverbs is going to be exciting, not only for those reasons that I've just mentioned, but also we are going to look at a man named Solomon. Solomon was a very, very interesting character. At one time, he was mentioned in the Scripture as being the wisest man who ever lived, with the exception of Jesus Christ. That person of Solomon brings in the story of David, and we know about David. David was a man after God's own heart, but David also fell into his own egotism, his own sin, and we see where David had an affair with Bathsheba. David arranged for the murder of her husband, Uriah, to hide his adultery, and the first child died. But then again, we see that Bathsheba and David had more children. and among those children was a man named Solomon. Now it is interesting to note that last Sunday in the year 1504 was the very first day that Michelangelo's statue, this famous statue of David, was unveiled and placed in front of the Cathedral of Florence many hundreds of years ago. But our study is not going to be of David. This man Solomon, he is reputed in the Bible as being very, very wise. So wise that many, many people came from around the world, kings and queens, in order to visit Solomon because they had heard of his wisdom. But we have to discover, how did Solomon get all of that wisdom? Was he born with it? Was he trained with it? You know, a lot of our wisdom comes from our parents. My parents gave me a lot of wisdom. They were fine Christian people, but they gave me morals, and they gave me teaching, and they did the best they could and performed a wonderful service to my life. They taught me how to trust Jesus Christ in my life. Solomon, on the other hand, David was his father. And Solomon was able to see the mistakes that David made and the consequences of those mistakes. And David must have spent a lot of time telling Solomon how to rule the kingdom in the future. Now, as a young 20-year-old, and most commentators seem to think that perhaps Solomon was as young as 20 whenever he assumed the throne. You and I, as 20 years old, we can look back and our minds are fast and we absorb things so quickly. And we made many good decisions. But think back when we were 20. We made a lot of bad ones, and some of them we are still living with today. Solomon was no exception. A lot of good decisions, a great ruler, trying to rule as if the heart of God was in him. But sometimes he'd make wrong decisions whenever he set God aside. So one night, he had a dream, and in that dream, God appeared to him, and he asked him a singular question. And whenever we read it from 1 Chronicles, let's see what God asked Solomon. 1 Chronicles 1:7. That night God appeared to Solomon and said to him, "Ask whatever you want me to give you." Solomon, in a few verses down to verse 10, simply said, "Give me wisdom and knowledge, that I may lead this people. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" Now, so let's assume for a moment that you also had that chance. In order to get one wish, let's assume for a moment that you found that proverbial note in a bottle on the beach, and you were granted 3 wishes. But in this case, you're granted 1. If God came to you and asked you, what would your wish be? Decide what it would be. Would it be for money or power, perhaps self, perhaps helping someone else, maybe a deceived child, maybe bringing someone back to life? Whatever the case may be, we can always think of something. But Solomon did something very differently. He asked for wisdom. And so we see in James, whenever you and I go to God and seek God diligently and ask him for wisdom, you better watch out. And you better not waver, because God is going to give you wisdom. Let's look at the very first time that Solomon used his wisdom that is mentioned in the Bible. 2 prostitutes were living together, and both of those prostitutes had babies. One night, unfortunately, one of the babies died of one of the prostitutes. And so they came to Solomon because the prostitute's baby who died, she switched them. The other prostitute was asleep, and she took her baby and switched the baby so that whenever the other woman woke up, she would think that her child had died. But after a very short period of time, she realized that was not the case. And so they went to Solomon to solve it, because neither one of them wanted to give up the live baby. What did Solomon do? And Solomon said in 1 Kings 3:24, "Then the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' So they brought a sword to the king. 'Cut the living child in half, and give one half to the other.' The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son, and said to the king, 'Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him.' But the other said, 'Neither I nor your child shall have him. Cut him in 2. Then the king gave his ruling. 'Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother.'" So we see the first example of Solomon using his wisdom, his God-given wisdom. This story resonated throughout all of the kingdom. And from that point on, many, many people from around the kingdom of that time came to see Solomon and came to see an example of his wisdom. So we'll begin right now looking at the first little bit of Proverbs. And what are the things that Proverbs is going to give us in preparation to the full treasure trove of learning about several things. We will learn about Solomon's wisdom. We will learn about Solomon himself. And unfortunately, we are going to learn about Solomon the man, because like all human beings, he had failings. And as he grew older, he failed a lot. And we see that he turned away from God. And then we will see in Ecclesiastes that he puts it all together and he sums it up. And so we will see what that sum is in the study of Proverbs, a little bit of Ecclesiastes, but especially of the wisdom of Solomon. Let's look at chapter 1, the first verse. The proverb of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. And then skipping down to verse 7, the crux of the whole particular passage. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Fools despise knowledge. That really doesn't come as a surprise, does it? Because perhaps you, I know I have had the ability, especially when I was young, to acquire knowledge. Chose not to do it. So Solomon is advising Rehoboam. Now Rehoboam was the king after Solomon. And we see in his reign that he took some bad advice. And we'll find out just in a moment as to why he did. There's a strange thing about a fool in God's eyes. A fool is someone in God's eyes who has the ability and the intelligence and the sources to find good wisdom, to seek after it and to find it and to benefit from it, but refuses to do so. In the case of Rehoboam coming up, Solomon is telling him, who should you be hanging out with? As we ask ourselves the question, who are our friends? And how do we advise our grandchildren, our children, not to hang around with the wrong people? And so in the next piece of scripture, Solomon is very blunt, very forward, that we shine our light to the people who need to see our light, but we don't hang out with them. We separate ourselves from them. And we certainly do not take advice from the people who do not follow God. My son, if simple men entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, come along with us, let's lie in wait for innocent blood. Let's ambush some harmless soul. Let's swallow them alive like the grave, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Cast lots with us. We will all share the loot. My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their paths, for their feet rush into evil. They are swift to shed blood. How useless to spread a net where every bird can see it. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. Sure are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten blame. It takes away the life of those who get it. For the waywardness of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. For whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease, without fear of harm. And now we come to the good part, and that is, what about the people, the young people especially, who seek, who profoundly go after wisdom? What are their benefits? And Solomon in chapter 2 of Proverbs is very pointed. They have great wisdom and the benefits thereof. So you and I, as we advise our children, as we advise our grandchildren, and we want to live in safety with them, a lot of it depends on how we seek wisdom. The Bible is replete with advice and scripture about the benefit of receiving wisdom. Let's look at what the scripture says. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, indeed, if you call out for insight,
and cry aloud for understanding. And if you look for it as if for silver, and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord, and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless. For he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones.
So as we begin our study of Proverbs, and this is only the beginning, the good stuff really starts to kick in around chapter 10. And so our class will be meeting at Vicky's house tomorrow night. So I'll see you then in class. But in the meantime, for you folks who do not have access other than just to Facebook, feel free to ask questions, feel free to like. And by the way, I don't make a penny off of this. So don't think I'm trying to expand in order to make money. Money will never come into these lessons. But if you have comments or questions concerning the lesson, or any comment at all, feel free to do so. So class and everyone else, I'll see you at the next lesson.